Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Nick Lugo Show. Today, I have on Dr. Edward Hirt, and he is going to explain some incredible concepts that, can go to so many different levels: productivity, willpower, and, just improving your daily life. So, Dr. Hirt, it's great to have you on.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So, first, I wanted you to go and explain to everybody what your research is and why it's important.
Okay. So I will tell you, I've been involved in a lot of different topics. I'm over in the psych department and IU here, been here for many years. And the biggest things that I've been interested throughout my career have been motivation and just what motivates people to do things we have to do. All of us that are involved in academics have to do a lot of work.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's things we want to do, sometimes it's things that are a bit drudgery for us to do, and then things we have to just satisfy requirements. But what keeps us going? What is it that sort of draws us into things and makes it seem like a pleasurable experience? And how do we sort of monitor ourselves and our performance to be able to achieve what we want to? What leads us to push beyond kind of what we have to do, and what are the things we have to do to sort of push ourselves to at least complete the things we need to do. And so that's been kind of the backdrop of what I've done. And so I've taken different approaches to that, and I think we'll get into some of that today, of both the good sides and the bad sides of that. So our success stories and some of the situations that are a little less productive, and maybe the downsides of motivation and stuff.
Yeah, so to get into your basic concept, I actually want to give you a story, and I want you to explain the story based off your theories, because this actually just blew me away. So I honestly, the reason why I got you on this podcast and the reason why I was so interested in this topic was because of something that happened about 2 weeks ago. So what happened with me is normally I go and I play basketball with friends, for usually around pretty often, a few times a week. And what normally happens is we play basketball, I play, I get tired, and then as the time goes on, as I play more games, I get more and more tired, and that's the end of it. By the time I get tired, then I don't want to play anymore. A certain level of tired. But one day I was playing and I could say that I got into something like the zone, right? Something like basketball players with no Mamba mentality. Like you just get right into the zone of wow, like I'm doing so well, today's going so great, and I'm just in a good sense of flow. And I didn't really understand it, but I realized that after a certain number of games, it was probably about 5 games, which is usually around my limit. I realized that I felt physically exhausted, right? I felt like I was tired, but I had so much energy. Like I had more energy than I had when I came into the courts. And for whatever reason, I played better than I did on the average day, even though I was extremely tired. And I came home, and by the time I came home, I realized that I still had so much energy after all the games were done, and I banged out about 2 hours worth of work on top of the basketball. So I realized that for whatever reason, when I was playing basketball, it actually gave me energy to go and do 2 incredible hours worth of work. And I just wanted to, figure out why that was. And I think you could explain that for me.
Well, it's a combination of really a number of cool things. So the one thing about your experience when you start playing basketball and you had that feeling of, and we call it the in the zone, right? I mean, everybody's got the name. Was it Dan Patrick on ESPN? They used to always call people in Fuego or something like that, and it just became the fun different kinds of things, and they'd show you, people that just go off, and you can think about those situations, people getting hot hands and people being in that sort of zone. There's a researcher at University of Chicago for years named Csikszentmihalyi who has developed this concept of flow.
Yeah.
And I know you've read some of that. And it just is a really interesting kind of experience, exactly, right? That people, and I think many of us may have it in other things than sports.
Mhm.
But it is that experience where you kind of lose sense of time, and you're just so immersed in doing what you're doing that fatigue doesn't really hit you,
Yeah.
that how long you're spending on this doesn't really bother you. it seems like you don't really have to be thinking about what you're doing. It's just happening naturally, and it's elusive. So I think that people who are super skilled athletes, so we may think like, an Olympic level athlete or somebody like that that can, ski down a thing. I mean, are they really thinking about what they have to do, or have they done it so many times that they can just literally get locked in? The swimmers, other kinds of people like that. But I think for many of us, we had that experience in some everyday life events. So I like to play pickup basketball like you, or every once in a while I play tennis and stuff like that. And you have days where it's just like, it's just happening, right? And I'm not having to think about, things. Your footwork is good, you're hitting the shots. You just seem like, you're on top of it and you're not reacting really to anything, you're having to think about it. That's great. I think some people have it with video games and get into that immersive experience where you're just like so into this that, again, it sort of transcends time and space and stuff. And it's like, where did those hours go? I got so into this game and stuff like that. And I was just into it. And so I think there's a number of things that we can have that really have that kind of feel to it. And I think the most interesting aspect of it, as you said, is that even though we may be expending a lot of energy, it doesn't feel like it.
Yeah.
And in fact, it actually is self-reinforcing in the sense that doing well and having that experience is so pleasurable that we want to keep it going. I mean, you probably played a lot longer than you anticipated, right? But then afterwards, we want it back. I mean, it's a great experience. There's some other researchers at Rochester that have been at Rochester for years that talk about the fact that people love to, when they want to perform and do different kinds of things, that it's really important that they feel a sense of kind of ownership, or what they call autonomy, when they're doing it, that I'm in charge and I'm in control, rather than I'm feeling like other people are pressuring me to do stuff, that I'm kind of victim of. And it can be anything from being paid and rewarded to do things, as much as like people are just telling you what to do and I'm feeling controlled by others. But when I feel a sense of autonomy and I can really call my own shots and I'm kind of in control here, and I feel that kind of experience. And I think flow is one of those where we really feel a sense of autonomy. I'm doing my own thing and I'm loving it, right? That people feel a subjective sense of what they call vitality, that it really energizes you. As you said, you just feel like, I'm kind of on top of the world right now, and I feel like I can accomplish things, and so I'm not tired. And maybe I can transfer it even to something else. So you can go and do schoolwork, or you can go do, some other, some kind of activity, build something, or go do some kind of task and stuff at this time, because you're just kind of feeling really connected, and like everything's kind of making sense to you, and you can then take on different challenges and be successful at them. So it is an experience. And I think that sometimes people feel, and I think he's written a lot about it, the Csikszentmihalyi guy, is that for some people it's not something you can necessarily produce. It
Yeah.
seems to be an experience that just when it happens, you take advantage of it. Like a writer would say that, they feel inspired at this moment. It's like, go get it all down on paper right now because the muse is here, right? I mean, I'm now feeling inspired and I'm able to get this stuff down, and it feels like, I have this moment or set of moments that I've got to capitalize on, as opposed to, I know how to produce this, and it is something that I can just make happen at will.
Yeah, well, it's funny. Yeah, so you actually just introduced the idea of flow, and I mean that's a book that I'm reading at the moment.
Yeah.
And he talks about it so often. He's like, one of the most, we'll say, biggest misconceptions that we have is that we have full control over our emotions, because to believe that you could, if I tell you right now, get angry, you're not, you can't really summon anger like that. You have to really focus on something that makes you angry, right? And that's sort of the bridge in between. So for example, I can't get myself into flow right now. But if I maybe go out and play some basketball, or have some spark of inspiration, that thing that's maybe a little bit out of my control, then I'll be able to really summon this mental state, which is beyond our capacity. One thing that I found that was really interesting, and this is a main concept that I think his name's Season Mihai.
No, they
Season
actually pronounce it Csikszentmihalyi.
Csikszentmihalyi.
Yeah, but who would know that? You wouldn't do it from like sounding that out.
Yeah, it's a very, very long last name. I think it's 14 letters.
Yeah, it's a Scrabble name.
But he talks about this, and you talked about this in one of your papers. I thought this was so interesting. Your paper is called "When Perception is More Than Reality," and where we talk about, well, feeling a physical sense of exhaustion, feeling a physical sense of, we'll say, ego depletion, or something like doing tasks that are difficult. That actually is not as important, or we'll say not as important as how you feel about how tired you are and how depleted you are. And I really want you to go into, well, what does that mean, and how can that actually affect our lives?
Yeah, this was something that was a really fun project that I worked on with one of my students. His name was Josh Clarkson. And Josh was a basketball player who was a
Hmm.
former athlete. And so one of the things he always was really interested in was that there was work that we were reading in our classes about this phenomenon called ego depletion. And basically the phenomenon was that if people do things that require a lot of self-control and a lot of concentration, that we only have a limited supply of kind of mental resources that we can devote at any one time. And if we sort of tap into those and utilize a lot of those, if we're doing some difficult tasks, so if you're having to do difficult problems, so let's say we don't like algebra or like finite math problems and stuff, and so you're having to go through a homework set and stuff after doing a couple hours of that. I mean, we say my brain's fried, like I gotta go take a break or do something. And so this work had basically shown that people hit that point when they're doing something that's challenging, that requires them to exercise a lot of self-control. And what happens if they try to do something else that again requires those same kinds of resources, their performance is going to go to pot. There's not going to do as well. So they show this depletion effect, right, where they can't do it afterwards nearly as well. And so they have to do something to replenish themselves or take a break or something to sort of recharge their batteries.
And it
And so they
seems
saw this as being a really nice analogy to the physical system, which is if you tax your muscles and stuff at some point, you just have to give them rest, right? Otherwise, you can't go on indefinitely. Is that real though? And that was the question we began with our research. So the question was, he just felt like his own experience as an athlete, and I think many of us feel like this with our own experiences doing other everyday type of things that require self-control, is like, but can you push through things? I mean, an athlete that really is good, one of the things that we believe that they can do is push through pain, push through fatigue, and excel. So NBA, championships are going on right now and stuff. Game sevens, like who can play in the fourth quarter and really, do well under those, and who kind of lets the fatigue kind of get to them and have turnovers, miss free throws, don't get back on defense as well and stuff like that. I mean, we tend to think that the people who really rise to those occasions are the really gifted, really good athletes and stuff. And so his whole thing was like, how much of it is in your head as opposed to literally limitations that we have that are imposed by our physical or mental systems. And so what we tried to do in that work was to be able to create situations where we could convince people that even if they had done something that's really fatiguing, um, you're not really that fatigued. And so how can we do that? So we came up with this thing where we did, and again, this is a psychological sort of trick, I guess, a little bit, but we had people do a task that was pretty challenging, like math type of problems. But we had, or I think it was actually a proofreading task we had them do that was something that required a lot of, following these certain rules, and you had to cross out certain letters, but only under certain conditions, et cetera. And we had them do it on yellow paper. And we told people in some conditions that the reason why we had you do it on yellow paper, after they'd done it, by the way, was that yellow is the color of the sun, and it's a very energizing kind of color. And so it turns out that when people do things on yellow paper as opposed to other things, they don't feel the same level of kind of fatigue, or, it's sort of an energizing kind of background and stuff. And so it has these effects on you. And people believed it. I mean, we were able to point to things that we believe. Or we could say, yellow is a color which actually, and it was a fairly dull yellow, like a Post-it note kind of yellow. So you could kind of go either way. It wasn't the bright, day glow color or something. So we said, it is a color that actually has been shown in research to be one that's sort of drab and sort of something that's sort of fatiguing on people's eyes and stuff. And so people who do things on this kind of paper actually feel sometimes more fatigued than they really are fatigued and stuff in situations. So we were able to manipulate manipulate how they perceive their state. So you've done something, it's something that does create some fatigue in some conditions, and others it was something that didn't really require much energy, but we told them that the paper might be the cause of what they're feeling. And so the thing is, what really mattered was what we told them, what they perceived their state to be, not how much they had done. So if they'd done a lot, if we tell them they shouldn't be feeling that fatigue, okay, I guess I'm not really all that fatigued. I can still keep going. And then they were able to push through and do really, really well. In other situations, they hadn't really done that much, but they did it on the fatiguing paper. And it's like, maybe I am really tired. You know, we can often convince ourselves. Just like somebody comes up to you and say, Nick, you look really tired today, right? I mean, did you sleep well? You know, are you okay? And stuff. It's like, yeah, well, maybe I am a little bit tired today and stuff like that. I mean, then I feel like, oh, I can't really do a lot today because I'm still tired from last night and other things that I've done and stuff. And so it just seemed like our perceptions are really what's driving us. And of course, probably we can play around with perceptions a lot more than we can with our actual state. So
Yeah.
that opens up the possibility that we can do a lot of mental gymnastics to be able to convince ourselves that we have more energy than we think we do, or we can convince ourselves I can't do it. I'm spent. Like I can't do it. So I need a break, or like, you know,
Yeah.
you're gonna get a pretty half-assed performance today because I'm really fatigued. Right? So it's like,
Yeah.
how much of this is real and how much of it's in our heads?
It was very interesting. So one of the things that you found in that study, and this blew me away. Like this completely changed my opinion on it. So you found that when people were not tired, not depleted, right? If you told them that yellow is a rejuvenating color, right? Then they will do a lot better than if they saw that yellow was a drab, dull color, right? But for the people who were tired, you found, and this blew me away, that if you told them that yellow was a rejuvenating color, they actually did worse, and a lot worse than the people that you told that yellow was a dull color. So for whatever reason, and I don't even know if we can come up with an explanation. I want to see what your explanation is on this. For people who are tired, if you tell them that yellow is a dull color, why will they do better than if you tell them that yellow is a rejuvenating color?
Because then they blame the reason why they were feeling tired on the color, because the things that we're doing were on this paper. Now you have me do something where that isn't involved anymore. Am I really tired? Or was it just that was making me feel tired? It wasn't the activity. It was just the being that background and that paper and stuff that was making me feel this way. Now I remove that and
Hmm.
ask you to do something else, and it's like, oh, well, now the obstacle's gone, right? I don't have to worry about that. So I actually probably have more energy than I thought I did, right? Because you
Yeah.
removed the cause of my fatigue, that paper. And
Uh,
then as you said, in the other case where they think that the paper should help them, it's like, you're taking away my crutch, you're taking away the thing that's energizing me. Maybe I'm not really that. So the
oh,
thing is, we pointed them in directions of what's causing it. Is it you, or is it the paper that's making you feel the way you're feeling and stuff like
that's so interesting. Yeah, I mean, it's a really interesting phenomenon. I see this with kids all the time, you know. And I remember this is what happened when I was dealing with kindergartners. I was a camp counselor for a while, and what would happen is, let's say a kid 5 years old falls and scrapes their knee, right? They fall and they scrape their knee, and their parent, or in this case me, walks over and says, oh my god, oh my god, we really need to get you packaged up. Like, I start freaking out, and all this stuff happens. Well, what's going to happen is the kid is really looking at me and saying, wait a second, he's freaking out, maybe I should be freaking out. But what about if I go up to him, and this is what I ended up doing? Someone scrapes their knee and I say, oh dude, that was pretty awesome. That was really cool what you just did there. You just jumped, and I love what you did there, and you got a scar to prove it. Look how awesome that is. Let's get you bandaged up, and then we'll get you right back out there. And they'll look at me and they'll smile. They'll be so happy. They're like, wow, was it really that cool? And this is one of the things that's been proven experimentally on your case, but one of the things that I was able to prove in my daily life, it's like, when we actually look, when we actually feel emotions, we're not the ones who feel the emotions. We look around to the environment and say, well, what does the environment tell me to feel? And I'm going to go and feel that.
Yep. It's fair. You're absolutely right. And so much of the, I mean, we presented a cue about the paper that wasn't another person, but it was another source, right? But as you said, what's the most prominent source for most people and how they interpret their states and things like that? What other people around them are feeling, what other people around them are saying. So the reaction you gave, parents give, or a counselor would give, and stuff in that situation where they're like, oh my God, like this is something too catastrophic, well, they'll start crying. If you sort of see it as something that's, it's no big deal, it happens to everybody, or as you said, call it a cool scar or something that as a result of something really daring that they just did and stuff, their interpretation is, hey, I'm cool, right? I mean, it's no biggie, right? And so I can keep going. So it is really amazing how much power, in those situations, the responses of other people around us really do communicate.
Yeah, yeah. And one of the things that I think it really proves, and this is something that I've had a qualm with, and I think you're going to be in the same boat about this, is that it really takes into account the individual, like the subjective experience over something like behavior, right? One of the things that Martin Seligman proved a while ago, and when he discovered this idea called learned helplessness, is that just what happens in the real world, just what happens in your reality is not what's important. What really is important is you, like you and your reaction in between. And one of the things that I'm not sure if he was the one who said it or it was Viktor Frankl in his book Man's Search for Meaning, but one of the things that he said is between stimulus and response lies the individual. There's something that is so important about how you perceive, how you deal with things, and how you handle them. And well, if you do that, that's going to have a huge effect on reality itself. So how do you feel about that?
Absolutely, because my field is called social psychology, and really probably the biggest theme in social psychology is exactly what you said, which is the way to understand why people do what they do is to really understand not necessarily, as you said, the preconditions as much as what's going on inside in their head. And so the term that we often use for that, I mean, most people would say it's their interpretation of the world, the interpretation of
Mhm.
situations. The word that we often use to sort of describe as is construal, how I construe reality, how I construe things that happen to me. So again, some of us can, in situations where things happen in relationships and stuff, I mean, we know some people go through really, really tough times and stuff, and some people come out of it okay, and some people really don't get over it, right? But
Yeah.
what dictates that? How do you construe that event? Was it something that was like, I'm better off without this and stuff. And this all things all work out. And, the whole idea of being able to kind of move on from things versus sitting there and sort of thinking like, you know, I still don't understand this, and I'm being victimized here, and is it about me, and reliving events and sort of thinking about what you could do to fix it, and it's like too late, and I mean, just dwelling and ruminating and stuff. You don't move on, right? And then of course people get into a downward spiral, and it really is hard to move on and to sort of then focus on everyday life situations. You get subject to depression, you get situations that really do cause a lot of problems. So much of it's your control of the events and how you interpret them, and then that's going to dictate your actions and your future.
Yeah, that was something I found that was incredibly interesting in your work. One of the things that you studied was the difference between conservatives and liberals and their amount of self-control.
Mhm.
And well, you could tell the study on that. You're the one who did it. You know where I'm going with it?
Yeah. So one of the things we were really interested in, when we started studying these things about depletion and people's subjective interpretations of it was, obviously some people are probably more attuned to their own feelings and things like that, or pay attention to things differently than others. And so we were investigating different kinds of possible individual differences that happen. And the one that we've sort of stumbled upon, I can't take credit that we like had this omniscient view that we knew what was going to be the key thing, but the one that has really turned out to be very important in our work is political ideology and political affiliation. And so conservatives tend to be people who really do, on self-control kinds of tasks, do a lot better. And so we found this individual difference where they were doing better and they seemed to overcome depletion more so than liberals did. And so what the heck's up with that, right? I mean, you get a difference, but then you have to sort of dig a little deeper and to try to figure out why. And what seems to be a really important part of that is sort of people's beliefs about what we call free will, or just the idea that I'm in control, I make things happen in my life, right? I gotta exercise that kind of control. And so I do this for myself, but I think other people should do that, in their lives, etc. And so, in the context of kind of working through difficult, kind of challenging kind of situations, having that kind of belief in free will can be helpful in the sense that it leads you to persist, it leads you to really work through things that are challenging and stuff, and to be able to kind of push yourself through it. Whereas other people may feel, less compelled to do that, or may be more attuned to their own limitations and stuff like that, and sort of let that guide their behavior. So that free will belief has been for us a really key new insight into this, is that seems to be an important thing. And conservatives and liberals may not be the only people who differ in beliefs of free will. There's other things that might, you know
Yeah, of course.
religious beliefs and other kinds of things that might really kind of come into play in terms of affecting people's beliefs about free will. But I think that kind of approach to things really does seem to shape a lot of times the kind of outcome variables we're really interested in performance. Like, will you persist when it's challenging? Will you, accept negative feedback and still like take a positive kind of view of, I gotta figure this out, I gotta work through this and stuff, versus want to give up or want to just you know back off and take a break and then try a different day or a different time.
Yeah, well, I'm not sure if you've ever looked at Dr. Jordan Peterson's research up in Canada. What he does is he actually determined the along with the big five personality traits, the individual differences between political ideologies. So, for example, if you're a conservative, you're more likely to be conscientious or something like, we'll say, hardworking.
Yeah.
And if you are liberal, you're more likely to be high in openness, which is more of like creativity, things like that. So what you just described there, and I'm sure we could both agree on this, is that what you found is a correlation, right? That for whatever reason, and we're not going to say because you're conservative that you are more likely to have self-control, and becoming conservative will give you self-control. It's more of something like, for whatever reason you've found in your research, which is pretty incredible, is that conservatives, for whatever reason, are better at self-control, and this might have to do with their belief in free will.
Right.
And one of the things that I found is really interesting, and getting back to sort of what you meant by victimizing, is that a big rebuke of liberals is that they have this idea of maybe you are a victim, right? Some of the things that we're struggling with politically is, well, it's something that we must determine, right? It's something that's a little ambiguous in our culture. It's like, people who are underprivileged, let's say, in whatever way that we want to describe it, are they victims? And then the second question is, and this really gets back to what your research is really considering, is, should they see themselves as victims even if they are? Because, well, it might just be a double, we'll say, a double fault and a downward spiral.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. So there's two things that I can tell you that are interesting on that front. One is that you brought up the individual differences of conservatives and liberals on some other dimensions. And Josh Clarkson, my former student who's at University of Cincinnati, and his students have been doing some stuff. And one of the things that they find is that people who are conservative do really well on certain kinds of tasks that require self-control, but they like it when there's a formula. And once you figure out the
Mhm.
formula, you continue to follow it.
Yeah.
You said the liberals like creativity, and you're right. They do it seems to be correlated with creativity. What they do better at is tasks that require you to switch back and forth between different things. So you don't like doing the same thing over and over, following the same rules. They don't seem to do as well on those tasks, maybe because they don't like them, maybe because, again, their orientation's different. But if it's a thing that requires you to have to switch back and forth, and like once you master this rule, you switch to something else or do that, conservatives hate those tasks.
Hmm.
Liberals thrive on them, or at least in a relative term. And so it's like, what does your task require? So it isn't necessarily that one group always does better than the other. It sort of depends on, well, what's required here. And so if it's something that requires more switching and creativity and kind of being flexible,
Mhm.
liberals seem to do better in those kinds of tasks. Conservatives tend to do better when there's a formula to be followed and it's real clear, and then I can really improve on that, exercise that, continue to master that and stuff. That's rewarding for them. That's something that they seem to do well. So it is interesting that it's not just like across the board, these people always do better than these. There's a lot more nuance to it. But the thing that you said about the victimization is something that we've been really, really interested in, because my students right now are really I'm curious about what this implication of free will is to how we deal with people who have things happen to them,
Yeah.
whether it's ourselves or others. And as you said, I mean, the idea of victimization, I think that we tend to think that liberals are way more compassionate when bad
Yeah.
things happen to people and they have a different viewpoint, whereas conservatives seem to be much more kind of rigid in the way that they think about, if you've done something wrong, you need to get punished for this. And, there is just black and white and aren't no shades of gray, et cetera, and things like that. And so one of the things we've been really interested in is whether that free will belief then does make it that when things go wrong, it's all your fault, you know.
Yeah.
And other people are much more open, that they're more liberal in orientation, or people who have less belief in free will so much are at least open to other kinds of explanations, institutional based things, situational factors, other kinds of things that affect our performance, where it isn't all under your own control, that no matter with the best intentions, it may not work out for you, and it doesn't always happen. And it's not like everybody can just make themselves anything. And so what are some kind of fun implications of that? We're working on things like social mobility, beliefs
Mm.
about social mobility. Do conservatives think that because everybody has free will, you can make anything of it yourself? And so if you don't, it's all your fault that you're not a super big
No matter
success,
what
right?
the environment.
Right? Whereas liberals are much more willing to sort of admit there's a lot of constraints on people's lives. And so even if they're doing everything they can, that isn't going to necessitate that they're going to be wildly successful or going to be able to jump, the social ladder or whatever, and make something of themselves. And so we're doing some stuff with regard to that. And also just the idea of how people respond when somebody makes mistakes and things like that, if they're more punitive and wanting to punish people and wanting to blame them as much versus showing a more compassionate level response of just admitting that it may not all be
Mhm.
your responsibility. And so how best to motivate people to in the future, one of the projects we're doing is about, like, do you take the more tough love kind of approach, or are you somebody who takes the more approach of saying it's going to be okay, and just kind of let it go and move on, and being a more kind of maybe even some people's terminology more permissive or more compassionate in response. But people may think that that sometimes is ineffective. Some people may think that's way more effective. And so that's what we're studying right now, which is kind of fun.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, it sounds like it's a tough balance to strike because you hit one end, but it looks like it's more of a spectrum. It's like,
Yeah.
well, you have to, if somebody believes in complete free will, then they're going to believe, well, no matter what happens in reality, it's all my fault. But if
Mhm.
you look at the opposite end of the spectrum, it's going to be something like, well, no matter what, I have no control over what I'm going to do, so I might as well not even try.
Mhm.
And
And that gets that learned helplessness you brought up with Seligman and stuff, and some of those things where
yeah.
sometimes people just, yeah, I mean, they think things are so far out of their control that I really don't have, I don't know what to do, right?
Exactly. So it's like yeah, I think it's a difficult question. It's like, where do you strike the balance in between? Let's say somebody says, well, I'm struggling with, let's say, one of the things that I deal with is weight problems, right? You ask the question of someone who's struggling with weight problems. It's like, how much control do they really have? Because one of the things that you struggle with is, well, maybe your environment, maybe you live in a place where there's food everywhere that's all unhealthy, and maybe your biological systems of, let's say, something like a lower form of addiction have taken over, and maybe you have sort of let go of the reins a little bit. And the question is, well, should you blame them or should you not blame them? And I think that's such a difficult question to ask.
Right, right, right. Yeah, absolutely. In fact, one of the best areas that people have really studied self-control behavior more than anything. I mean, so we think of it because we're in this environment in terms of academic stuff and staying, on task and doing the kind of work you have to do. But I think some of the best ones to study are things like people with regard to trying to manage their weight,
Yeah.
right? And then the other one is exercise,
Ex-
because almost everybody is trying to do that and finds that that is something that's really challenging to be able to do. And so, we're all looking for diets, we're all looking for, different programs that are going to keep us on task and stuff. But then ultimately it comes down to, you got to stick with it, right? So
yeah.
it's this perfect self-control dilemma where there's all those things that make it tough, but in fact, some people have success with it, some people don't. And so what is it that are the predictors of when it works for people and they can keep the weight off, or they can stay, on that exercise regimen, versus people who fall, the New Year's
Yeah.
resolution thing that like it lasts for like, a day or two or a week or a month, but
The average New Year's resolution dies on January 12th.
right. There you go. 2 weeks. Okay.
One of the things that, yeah, exactly, like super quick when you expect for it to be the whole year. But one of the things that I think is, well, very important to me as well as college students is, exercise and weight are important, as well as productivity. Productivity is something that all college students struggle with, especially in our age of having constant distractions everywhere. And one of the things that I really wanted to, well, we'll say inquire is, well, where does the line sort of stand in terms of productivity, right? So going off the ideas of self-deception, ego depletion, all these things, where exactly do we fall in that line on productivity?
Yeah, I mean, this has been a long-standing issue for me, because I think that one of the things that really got me involved in this kind of area of research was the downside of people who really, really struggle with like procrastination, people
Yeah,
who really have a difficulty being able to achieve what they want to, and then how does that affect you? Because most of us in psychology sort of think that self-esteem is all wrapped up in you and what you do. And so, if we're successful and stuff, then we feel good about ourselves. But if we
mhm,
fail, it really is a blow to our self-esteem, and it's hard to feel good about ourselves. And so we judge ourselves again relative to other people, but also in terms of objective standards, like are we meeting whatever the criteria we need to. And so that idea of like, how productive do I need to be? Everybody's got different standards. So we have to think first about like, what standards are we trying to achieve? And one of the things we know that's dangerous is that some of us get roped into sort of trying to achieve things that are unrealistic standards. So we all fear, like with weight particularly. I mean, what are we seeing in terms of people that are supposed to look good,
yeah,
right? And, is that really what standard we should be trying to live up to? So, we think about, why do people have eating disorders, right? I mean, that may be a situation because some of those standards that they're trying to live up to are unrealistic and they aren't even healthy,
yeah,
right? And yet that's what we see as being like what we should strive to. And I think a lot of people criticize Americans that we work way too hard and we don't recreate enough, right, compared to other people in the rest of the world. And so it's like, if you're not working 80 hours in your job or 90 hours, or you're not getting this amount of productivity done, you're slacking relative to somebody else. And so, are those standards we really want, or are we getting roped into some standards that somebody convinces us are what we should be doing, which may not be actually for our physical and or mental health, the good things that we should be using as those standards.
yeah.
That's a whole nother issue, and I haven't
Mhm.
really gone into that, but I think that's something that we know we have to think about before we
Also, yeah,
move.
I'd love for you to expand on it, because one of the problems I had when I was younger is I look at someone like Elon Musk, someone like
Right,
Thomas Edison,
right.
like if they worked 100 hours a week, sure, I could do it too, right? But yeah, what does the research say about, well, whether that's possible?
Well, I mean, again, standards are a great thing because, as you said, we look to other people and we're trying to decide, kind of, and judging ourselves and what we should be doing and stuff. I mean, if other people are doing it, we are very much social beings. We care about everybody else, and so people help inform us about what the standards are out there. And if everybody's studying, or if everybody's doing this much, or everybody's involved in 6 extracurricular activities, I guess I should be too, because I want to be a competitive on my resume, or I should be doing, all these other things too. And so that can be a great thing because it makes us think about other kinds of things that we might not have thought about if we weren't looking and comparing ourselves to others. But I think that the danger, of course, is whether we choose, standards of comparison that are really, really self-defeating. So, I mean, those of us that play basketball like ourselves, I mean, if we want to think we're going to be able to play as well as Michael Jordan or Kevin Durant or something like that, I mean, we're going to say like, I mean, I'm not making this, this level of performance. I can't jump like this. I can't do these things and stuff. And so, should I? should I just give up, right, or whatever, or do I see it as sort of something to aspire to that I can keep getting better? And so one of the things that's been really interesting that we found a lot in psychology is that when people pick, like particularly people that they're aspiring to be like,
Hmm.
so this can happen in sports, when you were in camps and stuff like that, when they'd have somebody come back and talk to you who was a successful player, or if we have people who are alums come back and talk to us about the things that they've been doing in their careers with the same degree that we have, from our institution and stuff like that. Those can be really inspiring stories because they did it, and they did it through a mechanism just like us. They're in the same program, they did these same things. But then the thing could be like, what were they doing at my point in time, and what does my resume look like compared to them, or what are my abilities at this point compared to what they were doing at the same point in time? And that could be like, what I mean, I'll never be that, right? So we find that a lot of it is based on not only choosing those standards, but the idea is when you look at kind of who they are and how they do things, what did it take for them to get there? And
Mm.
what's really interesting about the messages that people send, and they found this is really important for people who play that mentorship kind of role, is to communicate to people that, I guess, what I would say is that there are different ways in which success happens, and that some of us subscribe to a view which we would call, in the words of a woman named Carol Dweck and her colleagues, a kind of what they call an entity view, which some people have it and some people don't. And so it's like, if you're one of the people who have these abilities, you'll be successful. But if you don't, there's not a lot you can do to change it. Whereas other people subscribe to a view which she calls an incremental theory, or a growth mindset, which is, if you work at it, you can get better and you can see improvement. And so if you buy the kind of growth mindset, and we've heard a lot about growth mindset and culture recently, because I think it's, her views have really taken off, and she's written a book called Mindset, and it's getting a lot of play, especially in educational systems, is that how valuable it is to believe that you can change, right? And that think people can grow and people can get better, and that no matter where you start, you can still master things. So like, I don't get math. I'm just not a math person or something. It's like, yeah, but you can get it, right? I mean, it may take you a little longer, right? But if you work at this, you're going to master it, right? It isn't something, or foreign language or any number of things. If you buy the growth mindset that I can finally get this, it's not like, well, there's some people who are out there that are these kind of people, and there's some of people who are these, and I'm not one of them, so I can't do anything to change it. That's demoralizing for many of us, because
Yeah.
we have to do those things. We have to admit, I'm deficient, right? Versus I can get there. And so that's supposedly one of the reasons why people really lauded Michael Jordan. Was he, remember one of the things, and if anybody watched The Last Dance and stuff, is that he got cut in high school.
Yep.
All of us can relate. Can you think, like, there's no way, right? I mean, this guy had to be the best player in his team at all point. There was a point where he got cut. And of course, what did he do? He worked so hard after that, because it's hurt him so much, because he had an older brother that was good, and he wasn't able to be on the team, and blah, 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 blah. And so it's just like he worked harder than anybody else, and said, I'm not going to accept defeat. Like, I've got to work harder than anybody else to do it. And we think, no, he didn't have to work hard. He was just gifted, right? No, he had to work hard. And he really wanted to make that message clear to people, that it's like, I didn't just get this, right? I mean, I really worked at it. And if you really work hard, really want it,
Yeah.
you can make things happen. And so that's a much more inspiring story than like, look at what God gave me. And so like, I've been able to do this since I was 5. And
Yeah.
so, you know, love
That's
me, but I mean, you're never going to be me, so.
Yeah, that's one of the things that I guess I struggled with when I was younger. You look at someone like Elon Musk, Thomas Edison, and you're like, okay, they worked 90 hours a week and they were productive and they were getting things done, workaholics, and they're legends, right? Legends in the public eye.
Right.
And you ask the question, it's like, yeah, but did they work to become legends, or were they just naturally legends? And that's one of the things that I guess is a big question, right? A big question is, are all people, for example, let's say if you have the same motivational strategies as Elon Musk, can you get to the level of Elon Musk, or is he some form of superhuman? Like, do I the real underlying question is, do I have a limit, right? Do I have a limit, or
Yeah.
or is there some cap for me, like 60 hours, 70 hours, 40 hours, whatever? And I think that's one of the questions that.
Yeah, and I don't think we really have an answer to that. I mean, obviously within reason,
Mhm.
people can improve at a lot of things. And so
Yes.
you can see development, you can see that. Now, how much things require just complete inspiration, or how much things are basically just the right place at the right time, serendipitous kind of things, how many things did Edison try before he finally got the filament that worked in a light bulb, right? He tried 500 different things, or whatever the stories are and stuff. So he failed, but he kept doing it, right? And he probably had some insights in terms of at least something that, well, I could try this. And it was probably at least an educated hunch, not just randomly trying anything that he had available or whatever. But yeah, I think there's with a lot of things, we sort of believe things are probably a combination of different things. But I think too often, I think the reason why this growth mindset work has been so appealing recently is just that I think many people err on the side of giving up too quickly
Yeah.
and ascribing to the fixed mindset. And so they and I guess the other thing is, what do you use as your metric for success? To see myself improve and to see myself show some mastery of things, as opposed to I have to be the best, right? I mean, because sometimes, again, I think we can set these unrealistic standards and stuff. And yeah, if you want to work that hard at something and you need to be the absolute best, you will have to do it. But the amount of effort you're going to have to put in there, you're going to really have to sacrifice everything to get there. And
Yeah.
are you really willing to do that or not? Or did you just want to be able to say, I've been able to master something that was hard for me, but I take a lot of pride and accomplishment that I did it, right? I mean, I still made this happen. You wrote a book. Like, who in the hell does that, right? I mean, so to just have the accomplishment of completing that, right? I mean, that takes a lot of determination. You're going to be having moments where you probably question, should I be doing this, or is this working, and stuff like that. I'm struggling with, no, but I mean, you keep persisting at it, and there's a real sense of accomplishment in that. I mean, just seeing the progress and stuff. And so I
Yeah.
think that that's the reason why this is it has gained so much traction, and I think a lot of people are really believing it. Could you get to the goal? If not, I would never say impossible, but very rare.
Yeah, one of the things that really, really got to me, especially I'll say when I'll give my example, and then a more general example is that when I was writing my book, I knew that I was not writing Shakespeare. I knew that I wasn't. There was no way that I was gonna reach the highest. Um, I'm the mine's particularly a psychological self-help book. I'm not gonna reach number one. I'm not gonna be the top, but I'm gonna write the best book that I could write. And one of the things that I see college students struggle with is, for example, right, like through this and throughout my high school career, like I've been very good with work ethic and things like that. But some of my friends, they struggle with, well, Nick's working this hard and Nick's working X hours a week and getting this much done, but I'm only working here, and then I'm sitting here and I see some of my friends who are above me and I'm saying they're working this much a week and they're getting this much done and I'm a little bit below them. And well, the question is really, so it seems like the answer is something like, should you see yourself as an individual, right? Should you focus on these baby steps? And it seems like the answer is yes, but it's I think you understand it's so tough for
Right.
people to see it that way.
Right. And I think as we work through a lot of big challenges, things, I mean, sometimes it's like if we look at the end point, it seems so far and distal and so challenging that it can be demotivating.
Yeah.
Whereas they always say, do sub goals, I need to get this much done, right? I need to get chapter 1 and 2 done by this point in time, right? I need to get this part of this paper done, right? I mean, I'm not thinking about getting the whole 25-page paper done. I'm just going to get the first introduction part, the first 5 pages and stuff by this deadline or something, whatever. I mean, when we do that, then you have at least a sense of accomplishment and you get that momentum effect, right? And it's reinforcing to sort of see those. So yeah, I think that's a big part of it. We have to sort of break it up into more manageable and things, and sort of self-reinforce when we accomplish those things. And I think that works. And
Another one.
the thing you were saying about comparing always to other people, the one thing that's notorious about social comparison is, while you can always kind of probably use it in the positive sense to console yourself by finding somebody who's worse off than you,
Mhm.
You can almost always find somebody who's better than you and
Mhm.
better off than you, right? And so it can always be a fodder for complacency, or like literally like this kind of thing of I'm never good enough, right? So it's like drawing the balance of that. We can choose comparison others all along the way, and it's some of it's motivated, some of it's just who are people choosing as our comparison others. Because those of us that are families, it's like living up to your older siblings is always thrust upon you and stuff. And how do you avoid that? And it's like, I don't care about what they, well, but it
Good
gets
man.
thrust upon you, and there's no way you can get around it, right? I mean, sometimes, or people who are in your sorority fraternity, or somebody who's like your roommates, or people who are right in front of you. It's hard to sort of not do some of the comparisons with the people that are just naturally there. But I
Yeah, I
think
mean,
sometimes we can make ourselves miserable too, because we can always find those people that make us look bad, or those people that we can sort of say, well, at least I'm not like so and so, right? I mean,
yeah.
sort of
And
console ourselves with anything.
it's so difficult. It's so difficult because this gets back into right exactly to what we were talking about before in terms of the social example of, well, should you pull yourself up by your bootstraps, like the conservative, like some conservatives believe, or should you really take into account what environment you're placed into? And for example, somebody born in sub-Saharan Africa right now probably does not even have the potential to be someone like Jeff Bezos, right? But we look at someone like Jeff Bezos probably is a bad example. I look at your traditional rags to riches story, right? Your traditional, I'll go with Tony Robbins because he's one of my inspirations. Mother was a drug addict, like really like treated him very, very poorly and was poor and had all these problems. But at the end of the day, he ended up being some massive, crazy, billionaire, all these things, was able to help millions of people. It's like, how does that make me feel, right? How does that make me feel as an individual saying, well, he was able to pull himself by his bootstraps, right?
Right,
Like
right.
in the literal sense. And well, why haven't I done that yet? So I see, the tough balance that needs to be struck.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, and I think, it is one of those things that you never really completely, it's not a static thing, let's put it that way. So, I mean, obviously at different points you may feel really good about things and whatever, and feel pretty okay, and then something strikes you, or some comparison kind of thing gets kind of thrust upon you, and all of a sudden it's like, I don't feel so good about anything anymore, and now I have to, reevaluate and sort of, you know,
Well, part of that
compensate with that.
Yeah, well, part of that reevaluation, and I think this is kind of what we're getting at it at the end point, is something like, well, maybe you shouldn't look at it from the frame of comparison, because every time you look at comparison, you're looking at it from the wrong frame of mind. You should really be looking at it in terms of the individual, right? The subjective individual, and saying, well, I'm going to pursue my personal potential. I'm going to go as far as I could possibly go. And you know what? Maybe if I look at something like someone like Tony Robbins just as a marker, right? Just as someone like okay, he went that far. Maybe my personal potential is larger than what I previously thought it was, and that maybe is a good balance. But at the end of the day, the best marker is something like the individual.
Right. Yeah, and I think that idea of sort of construing things from the perspective of self-improvement, and kind of selecting your own goals relative to what you want to accomplish, rather than necessarily what somebody else chose as their goals. I think a lot of times people seem to feel like they're getting some sense of that, because the question I think many of us have that helps us at least ground things is like, what did they have to give up to do that?
Yeah.
Because I think a lot of times people, especially now that a lot of people are struggling with work-life balance, it's
Mhm.
like, okay, so to do that, do I really want that? And am I really willing to sacrifice these other things to do that? Or do I want this? And so now do I kind of rein in my aspirations on this front of my life, because I want to have a social life, and I want to have a family, or I want to not neglect these other facets of my life and stuff. And so it seems like that for many people is a really nice grounding mechanism to be able to sort of at least rein in
Mhm.
those real unrealistic expectations, and just make them something that, yes, can still be aspirational, but not completely out of bounds, that it's going to literally make you miserable. You know?
Yeah, I mean that's another important shift in perspective. So I said, don't look at it in terms of the group, look at it in terms of the individual. You're saying something like, well, don't only look at one variable, look at multiple variables. There are multiple different potentials that you could hit in your life: your work potential, your family potential, your friends potential, your social potential, all the your happiness potential. And all of these things are dynamic. And looking only at, we'll say, Tony Robbins as somebody who succeeded in his work life is not looking at the entire individual. I like that. I think one of the lessons that I just really want to throw in here that I really really liked is that something that you talked about before, was that the problem is not in terms of reaching our limits and going too far. Often the problem is not even hitting our limit, right? These sort of self-defeating behaviors, these sort of, we'll say, deceiving yourself to believe that your limit is somewhere when really it's a lot higher and you just don't even know how high you could go. And one of the we'll say practical wisdom that I could give here, and this was something that Jordan Peterson talked about. He said very simply, you don't know how far your limits are until you reach the limit. So if if you're not going to reach your limit, then you're never going to know how far that you could go, and you're always going to live with some form of probably regret. So the idea is, well, if you really want to reach your limit, you probably have to go past it first. And he recommended that's what you do in your 20s, and that's what college life and your beginning work life is for. One of the biggest regrets of people in their 30s, this is something you might find interesting. One of the biggest regrets of people in their 30s is that they didn't work hard enough in their 20s. Valid, right? And what they're really saying is, I never reach my limits. I never push past.
Yeah, and this relates to the other topic that I've done a lot of work on, which is that self-handicapping, which is this idea that sometimes people seem to erect obstacles in their lives, but they do
What?
that with the express purpose of being able to have excuses, to be able to blame any failures or lack of reaching those goals upon. And so I think we all know people like that. I mean, it isn't something that everybody does, but it's certainly something I think that everybody can relate to, is know people who seem to always have excuses for why they were never able to do certain things, why they achieve. So they may express those regrets, but it's like the regrets aren't something that they take credit for. It's more like these things prevented them from doing it.
Mm,
So the guy that wrote the original paper in self-handicapping always used a quote out of a famous Marlon Brando movie. I think it was called On the Waterfront, where he said, "I could have been a contender. I could have been, but he wasn't," right? And so the thing is, many of us would see that as, well, you should have been one, right? But it's more the thing of, you know, these things prevented me from doing it, and so life was kind of unfair to me, or these other things kind of got in the way of that and stuff, but I could have been so much better. And so we talk about regret as being a negative thing, but in some ways with self-handicappers, that regret is something they can hold on to as
mm,
being like
an excuse.
their potential is still there, and if they believe in that potential, right, I still have that to hold on to,
Um,
right? And that's an interesting thing. We would think, and again, that's why there's such a strong, we find a big individual difference. For some people, that is, it makes no sense. They don't even understand a handicapper. It's like, why would you ever do that? Why, I don't want to have those regrets. I don't want to think about potential. I want to just do things, right? I want to accomplish. But for a handicapper, it's really one of those things where their self-esteem is wrapped up in that idea of, I have potential more than my performance has shown. And so that they can hold on to that, and that can maintain, I would still say it's a pretty fragile self-esteem, but it is still this belief that I can have I could have accomplished way more than I have. So I feel some semblance of self-integrity from that.
is that what you guys actually found experimentally? Like, you found that people self-handicap because they want to have excuses?
Right. In
Really?
other words, it's like, before the event happens, I will take advantage of something that I know will be a reasonable excuse of why I might not do well, so that I have something to blame it on. Like, I'm
Wow.
afraid I'm not going to do well. I want to have an excuse in place so that I can blame my failure not on the fact that I'm not capable, but really that this other thing was what
Wow.
prevented me from doing it.
So,
And so
so
again, what's so interesting to me about it is just how for some people that would never ever even entertain in their mind. Like why would somebody do that?
place an
And
obstacle. Yeah.
but I think for some people the fear of failure and the concern about what the implications of failure are so great that when they feel like they can't control it themselves, they gotta come up with an excuse that they think is believable so that they can hold on to the fact that even
Wow.
if I don't do well, I've got an excuse in place that says I could have done well if only.
That's so counterintuitive. That's
Isn't
so
it?
counterintuitive. Because what I would normally think is I try as hard as I can,
Like,
make a mistake, and then look back and say, okay, there were three things that were out of my control. So I'm going to use these three as my excuse. But what you're saying is, I don't try as hard as I possibly could, be knowing that if I tried as hard as I possibly could, then I can't come up with a good excuse. So it's a like it actually the self-handicapping actually influences the performance.
yep.
Wow.
So the most telling thing that there were a lot of studies showing that people do certain things that seem like self-sabotage before they actually perform things, and then that they don't seem as depressed about failing because they have an excuse in place. Whereas if they tried their best, so we literally did a study with people that were identified as people who are more likely or less likely to handicap, and asked them, would you, which of these situations would bother you more? I tried my best and I didn't do well,
Mhm.
or I didn't try my best and as a result I didn't do well. And so for people who are non-handicappers, they're like, of course I want to always feel like I did my best, right? If I didn't try my best and I failed, I'd be so upset with myself, right? I mean, that I don't ever want to have that experience. So I will always try my best because at least I can take satisfaction that I tried my best, right?
Yeah, yeah.
For a handicapper, they literally say, I do not want to ever put myself in the situation where I tried my best and fail.
Really.
I want to be in a situation where I have that excuse, where like the worst thing for me would be if I tried my best and failed, because that basically says I am incapable.
Wow.
I don't have the ability. And so to actually have people who say, that's what I want, versus other people saying, like, I would never do that. It was like, oh my God. And as you said, for those of us who aren't handicappers, it just doesn't compute. It doesn't make any
Yeah.
sense. Like, why would you ever do that? But it's just that I think for some people, the fear of failure and the implications of failure are so powerful that they just do not want to put themselves in a situation where they literally know that they fail. And I think one of the things we talked about, that sort of fixed versus growth mindset, is that almost what self-handicapping requires is you have to have the fixed mindset.
Yeah.
Because at some level you have to believe that if you failed, it would say you're incapable, and then I'm an incompetent person, and what will that say about me? It's
Yeah.
not like, oh, I could always get better. No, it's like, no, I would find out I'm not good, and then that would be devastating.
Wow. I notice that all the time. Like as you're speaking it, like I notice there are people in my life who they'll literally say like, you know, before an event, they'll be like, yeah, I'm not gonna try as hard. Or like you could tell they're not trying as hard as they possibly could for that. And you could tell it's for that exact reason. They know because if they fail, if they lose, they could just say, well, I didn't try. So there.
Yeah, what's been fun for us is that to think about the range of different situations where this happens, because initially people were doing it all with like testing and academic settings, because it's just where we're at, we're at university studying this and stuff, and so it's like things people don't do before a test, right? I mean, they'll go out drinking, or they'll blow off, they'll not show up to class and miss the lectures right before the test when they're doing like the review sessions and stuff like that. And it's like, this would help to do this and like to miss those and then be able to say, oh yeah, well, I would have done fine if only I'd done. Yeah, well,
Yeah.
why didn't you do them? I mean, really, I mean, again, I mean, not the only reasons people miss aren't always self-handicapping, but at least that can be something that people do on purpose to be able to make that happen. But you think like in interviews, like people who don't really try their best during an interview, or even like potential dates and stuff, where they're like, I'm so afraid that they'll reject me, so I'll just make sure it doesn't go well so that I can blame it on other things instead of me. And it's like, Yeah, it happened. Or people who don't think they're going to make the team in athletics and stuff, and so they don't really put forth their best effort and, like, do the right things that they need to do to come in really prepared for the tryouts or other kinds of things. It's like,
Wow.
wonder whether a lot of that is
Yeah.
self-handicapping. And so that's where it's fun to study, just because it's so, I think there's many contexts where we see it. But the thing is, it's hard to sort of say. Sometimes people fail for all kinds of reasons, and some of it's on purpose and some of it's not. So how do you separate out ones where people really consciously kind of set this up versus, things do happen, where people can't do those things and
Yeah,
stuff.
exactly. Like you're
So
asking all the time, like,
how you handle it after the fact is the key, right? Do you sort of use it as this excuse versus
yeah,
not? I think is pretty telling.
yeah, no, I think, huh, that's really funny. Yeah, I mean, when you think about it, somebody who goes and drinks the night before an exam, right? You ask the question, is it because of self-handicapping or is it just because they like to party, right?
Right.
Like
Exactly.
it's such a valid question, and
Exactly.
it's very difficult to parse out.
Got to ask you one quick question though.
Sure.
Okay. Do we find a big individual difference in propensity of self-handicap? And it's based on gender. Who does
Hmm.
self-handicapping a lot more, men or women?
Oh, God, do I need a rational basis for this answer? I'll say from my life, obviously I spent a lot more time with men. So, and I've seen it a lot in men. So I'll go with men.
Yep, absolutely. Very strong.
Why?
Women make excuses. I mean, it's not to say people don't make excuses. Men and women make excuses all the time, but to actually, like, set up excuses so that you can use them later like that, it's definitely a male behavior. It
Is it
really
because of
is.
competition? It seems like it's
Well,
based.
that's been the fun thing for us, is like there's so many things that sort of seem like rational reasons as to why that might be the case. Is there more pressure on men to
Yeah.
be successful? Is it sort of gender stereotypes that, you kind of have to, sort of look like you don't want to try your best and stuff like that, and there's some sort of thing with that. We've tried a number of things, but it's been pretty elusive. But I will tell you, the one thing that's most interesting that we've found so far is that most women really don't subscribe to the view of not wanting to try their hardest,
Okay.
and they don't understand people who won't do that. So um, so so clearly there is that just ascription of saying that you should work your hardest whenever you can and stuff, that is something we always get stronger gender differences on. And so that has something to do with this, just a subscription to the belief that I always try my best at anything I do, right? And I need to do that. But what's funny about it is it's not just something personal. It's like, but everybody should do that too. So it's not just like I believe this about me and I've been raised this way and like other people can do it. No, it's like, but you all should try really hard. Women think that,
Yeah.
and the guys are much more like, whatever. I mean, they can excuse that behavior much more readily than women can. So what we find that's funny is that a lot of times when self-handicapping occurs in some situations where we're able to show it, women don't like it. And they tend to be pretty negative in their evaluations of people who do this.
Hmm.
Whereas men are much more lenient towards people who do it. If you do self-handicap and somebody uses that excuse and stuff like that, it's like, yeah, well, that doesn't make them a bad person. Or, I mean, they probably could do a lot better if they just tried. They just need to, kind of, maybe they got anxious. Maybe they'll make more excuses about it. Whereas women are like, that person's an idiot. Like, really, like, I don't get it. Like, who would do that? Like, you're just, I don't, it doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah. The
So it's
underlying
funny.
question is just why? Like
Yeah.
why?
Why?
Like why would a male handicap themselves more often than a
Right.
female? Well,
Right.
one of the things I'll give you an anecdotal story. One of the things that I've noticed is that the rut of the litter, metaphorically speaking,
Mhm.
in my social groups, right, will say, let's say I'm going to play basketball, and the weakest kids, right, the kids who just don't have enough muscle mass, are a lot shorter, all those things, if you operationally define them, they're not going to try as hard as the ones who are at the top. And that could be a potential explanation. It's like they just know that, like a learned helplessness type reason. Like they just have absolutely no chance of winning in the first place, or they have a lower chance of winning in the first place. So to save their pride, they say I might as well not try. Maybe that's it.
Possibly. I mean, the thing that's interesting is with a lot of handicappers, it can be people who are really successful. I mean, they don't have to be terrible,
Mhm.
and still we can be insecure about our abilities at any point in time, right? So where I had never done this study, but I've always been really interested in this, is to think about life transitions. Okay, so you moved from high school to college, right? You were one of the top people in your class in high school, but now you're going to a college where there's a lot of smart people.
Mm.
Now all of a sudden, am I really sure how smart I am? And if I struggle and stuff like that, do I really want to put myself to the test and stuff? Or athletics, right? I mean, now, you were really good in your high school and stuff like that, but now you're playing at a D1 institution, and all these people are the best players of their thing and stuff. And so, are people gonna? I mean, we think that a lot of people are like rise to the challenge, right? I mean, I want to be pushed, right, and stuff, and other people are like,
I don't know if I
sure,
could.
and so you can imagine when it enters into your mind that I might not be as good, or I'm worried about that. And if I fail, what would it say about me? It's like,
Yeah.
maybe I'm not even going to really put it all out there, because I could just say, I didn't really care, or blah, 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 blah. You got some excuse. And so I just think a lot of times, when everything is in place and we kind of know where we stand, it's all good. But when uncertainty gets in there and there's a lot of sort of you're unsure kind of where you stand relative to others and stuff, but it's important, then that's something where I think almost anybody could think about doing this, or
Yeah.
could entertain this as a possibility, where you think like, maybe.
Oh, trust me. I was when I was deciding between colleges, I was deciding between literally that exact idea, right? Do you want to be this was the metaphor
Big
that,
fish in small pond thing.
yeah, yeah, big fish in a small pond or small fish in a big pond,
Right.
right? Is that it? Yeah.
Yeah,
So it's like, would you rather be top 10% in a less prestigious university,
right,
or would you rather be top 50% in a prestigious university?
right.
And that's the question that when I consulted my friends about it, I got such a wide variety of answers.
Hmm.
Such a wide variety of answers. I had a bunch of my friends, maybe looking back on it, I could call them the more prideful ones.
Hmm.
They were the ones who said, be the big fish in the small pond, right? Be the one who's a top 10% of your class, be
Yeah,
the one who's ruling that school because, well, you can do it, right? Because that would make you top notch. But at the same time, I had a bunch of people who were like, no, dude, go for the bigger school, right? Go for the bigger school, rise to the occasion. That's where your potential lies.
right.
And I can imagine there's a complete personality difference between the people who think both types of views.
Yeah, right. That's
Wow.
fun.
All right, I'm going to ask you one final question because we never got to this, but this is something that, well, it's a good place to wind down, and it's also something that's really been on my mind in terms of your self-handicapping mindset as you're working in your daily life. What daily rituals, what things have you added into your life that counteract, we'll say, self-handicapping in your productive life?
Yeah, yeah, it's one of those great things that, yeah, you research this, a physician heal thyself kind of thing. Like, you don't succumb to this, do you?
Yeah.
Right. And so I think what has happened for me is, I just think aware, and this is what I've liked about psychology, and I think what has drawn me to it is just knowing some of these things and just being aware of them. I think awareness is the first step.
So you can
I
catch.
don't think it prevents you from ever doing this. And in fact, part of the reason why they're so curious to many of us, and why we care about it, and really can relate to it and find it interesting and stuff, is because we can relate it to ourselves, and we can relate it to people we know. And so I think there's some situations where you know I mean, at least if you have some awareness of it, you can sort of catch yourself before you go full blown into it. I think the toughest thing for me is just that, as much as we know that um, there's a danger in social comparison, as we talked about, and that you know we set aspirations for ourselves that are sometimes really unrealistic. So for productivity and things like that, it's like, at the end of the day, what will I take the most pride in terms of what I've done and accomplished? And I think that, certainly as an older person, I think I've grown over the years in terms of being able to sort of admit that, I don't have to be the top person in everything I do. I used to be a really, really competitive person, like as a weekend athlete and stuff like that. And it's like I've mellowed on that. Like, and in terms of productivity, like you want to be the most productive person in your department? Are you okay being above the mean or in the top 30%? And so I think aspirationally, I think that has helped me not give up and create those excuses like self-handicappers do. So I think knowing that worrying about failure is sort of a waste of time and
Mm.
getting wrapped up in that. And I know that that's one of the biggest precursors of handicapping. It's like you do what you can do, right? Like I'll just do what I can do. And I think many of us as students and in situations, it's like, we know it's not going to be perfect. You said this about your book. It's not going to be the best. I'm not writing Shakespeare here. I want it to be good though, right?
Yeah.
And I'm not willing to let go of that. But I'll be okay if it's good. And if it's very good, all great. But I've given up perfection, right? I'm not. And so I think if you can do that, then the threat of handicapping isn't really as present, because it's like I think you tend to have such higher aspirations that create so much anxiety in us that motivate that behavior, that if you can just kind of be satisfied with doing your best and feel like this will be good enough and I'm going to still feel good about myself. And I think, as we said, people take pride in the fact that I did my best no matter how it turns out.
Yeah.
There's a lot of consolation in that. And I think that to me has been like, even if sometimes I find myself wavering on that one, it's like, no, that's going to be okay.
Yeah.
Because with a lot of things, we can't be perfect. And I think that so much we're bred to think that we gotta be the top and we gotta be perfect and stuff, and that anything less than that is gonna be, unsatisfactory and is gonna sort of reflect badly on me. And it's like, no, not really. And I think sometimes we see that a lot more, I think, with experience, but I think also just thinking through some of those kinds of things does help. So
Yeah.
I mean, I think doing a pretty good job is something that is sufficient in most cases. And I think once we realize that, it's like, I just make sure I do that.
Yeah. It
And
seems
I
like
feel like I can do that, right? So,
Yeah, it seems like a part of that, like what you're saying right now, is like you let go of this high sense of mighty pride.
mhm.
It's like, no, I don't have to be literally the top of the top. I don't have to, which requires sacrifices. I don't have to sacrifice everything for some goal. One of the crazy realizations that I had, and I told you I wanted to work 89 to 90 hours a week,
Yeah.
is those people are crazy. Those people are crazy, like working 80, 90 hours a week, like those are the small minority of people that are crazy enough to give up their entire life, to sacrifice essentially everything for their work. And well, if you look at it from that perspective, it's like there's a completely different way of viewing the world. So
But at the same breath, we can flip it and say, if I had to do that to accomplish one thing, could I force myself to do it? Yeah. I mean, you know what I mean? Like pulling the all-nighter or needing to do that. I have to rally myself and push through it. And that's where the depletion and working through all those kind of things does have to happen. I could do that, but I'm not going to do that as a regular kind of occurrence. And so as you said, it's always a balancing act, which is cool, which is, can you force yourself to do what you got to do, even when it's hard? But the same breath, do you create these kind of unrealistic expectations that mean that I'm never satisfied with myself and I'm always like, self-flagellating, like I'm not working hard enough and I'm not accomplishing enough and I'm not as good as so and so and stuff. And that's sort of, yeah.
wow, I know. This is the eternal debate, but I'm happy that we at least settled it a little bit, and I hope for
Yeah,
everyone
it's
who's
fun.
listening. Yeah, I hope for everyone who's listening that this was just again, it brings some awareness, right? It makes you well, hopefully push your limits a little bit more. That's my hope. All right, Dr. Edward Hirt, thank you for coming on.
Yeah, thank you. See you later, Nick.